What's good, people? Welcome back to another video on 8 Count. Today we're looking back at last weekend's fight between Canelo Alvarez and Dimitri Bivol. Before we get into the video, if you do enjoy it, please leave a like down below. It's highly appreciated. Please comment in the section down below. Let me know how many rounds you did score for Canelo in this fight, because I'm really interested to see how many people scored more than 3 rounds of Canelo. Also, I've got a video coming out tomorrow where I'll be looking at the UFC fight night, which is coming up between Jan Blachowicz and Alexander Rakic. I'm going to be giving you my predictions for all those fights, so make sure you subscribe to the channel if that's something you might be interested in. And let's get straight into it, man. I thought this fight was a really interesting one. Coming in, I didn't do a prediction video for it. I probably should have, but I just didn't get around to it in the end. But my prediction going into it was I thought that Canelo would probably get a TKO stoppage somewhere between round 8 and round 10, a bit later on in the fight. I thought it'd take him a while to break down Bivol, obviously a bigger opponent than he's used to, and you know, I did think Bivol will give him some problems. Obviously his offense isn't the flashiest, but it's very, very good for what it is. You know, he's really good with the jab and using combinations. But I did think Canelo would get around it in the end, but he didn't. You know, at the end of this fight, all 3 judges scored this contest 115 to 113 in favor of Bivol. For me, I scored it 110, 118 in favor of Bivol. I give Canelo 2 rounds, I think. Yep. I give him the 2nd round and the 9th round. For me, you know, this fight was a bit of a weird one. I felt like the commentary wasn't the best. I felt that some of the people on the commentary were really good, but they were bringing some people in, and I felt like they were giving the wrong sort of view on what was happening in the fight. You know, I think after 4 rounds, one of the commentators came in and said that Canelo was, you know, basically putting on a masterpiece and dominating the fight. And I was like, fuck, am I scoring this fight right? I was double checking myself, because I'm like, nah, man, I just didn't see it this way. And, you know, I think Showtime, Shaw Porter, I think give Canelo maybe 3 of the first 4 rounds, which I find really generous. But I mean, it is what it is, as we have a plane going over my house by the sounds of it, which is great. But yeah, for me, I scored only 2 rounds for Canelo. I scored in the 2nd round. I felt like his work was probably the more eye-catching of the 2. And in the 9th round, I gave Canelo the round. I thought he was catching Bivol more, you know, than previous in the fight. I thought that, you know, he's much more accurate in this round. But the other rounds, I thought Bivol pull it on Canelo, man. I thought he did a great job with overwhelming him. And for a while now, I've been having debates with people, you know, kind of like fantasy matchups and boxing. My favorite fighter of all time, probably Joe Calzaghe, and for me, I've always said that I think a prime Calzaghe would have beat Canelo. Like, do I think he would be the sort of an opponent which would give Canelo the most problems? I do. You know, it's not necessarily 100% that I think that. I think that, you know, Canelo could beat him as well. I think the power, what Canelo has, and, you know, he'd probably give Joe problems. But for me, the thing which I think would give Joe the biggest advantage in that fight would be the fact that he doesn't throw in, you know, 1s and 3s, you know, his combination. He throws, you know, 4, 5, 6 at a time. And if you've ever watched the Joe Calzaghe documentary, it's brilliant when his father's talking about it and talking about music, and, you know, you got to throw more. And, you know, it was brilliant. And I've always thought that. And I think this fight kind of showed that I think Calzaghe would have had great success. But on to Bivol, what I thought he did well was, you know, he was throwing more than 2 and 3 at a time. He was throwing 4 and 5 at certain times in the fight. And, you know, he always made sure that he was the one who was kind of finishing the conversation almost. I think, you know, Canelo sometimes would throw, but then Bivol would come straight back and make sure that he put an exclamation mark on what happened. And for me, you know, he threw, you know, so many more than Canelo, landed so many more than Canelo. And I thought he was just outworking him at times. And, you know, at times you saw Canelo kind of back up against the ropes, like you can see in this picture right here. And not everything was landing, you know, a lot of it was off the gloves and off the arms and that. But, you know, it's so much more apparent who's winning the fight when, you know, Canelo's willing to just back up against the ropes and kind of surrender himself and not throw back. You know, out of the 2 throughout the fight, I thought he was the much cleaner and more active fighter. For me, he took the fight to Canelo, which a lot of people do not do. And I think you saw at the end, Canelo was a lot more frustrated. I know a lot of people talking about the fatigue in Canelo, and the fatigue was a bit of a weird one because his output was so little. I was surprised he was so fatigued looking. But yeah, for Canelo, I kind of had issues with his performance, and I think it kind of proves that when he goes up in weight, he's not able to do the same sort of thing. You saw Bivol talking about the power of Canelo and saying that his power isn't like ridiculous and on the level of some other guys he's fought. But I think Canelo, if he cannot have that power advantage over his opponent, he can't fight the way he wants to fight. And for me, he was kind of trying to fight the way he wanted to fight, and that's kind of like fighting in bursts. And for me, I don't think it's going to have too much of an effect when he's going up in weight. I think he's got to be a lot more active, and I think he's got to be on the front foot a lot more. I think I think Bivol did a great job of kind of nullifying some of the offense of Canelo by basically not respecting him as much and coming forward. I think Canelo's got to be the one, if they do a rematch, who's going to be on the front foot. They are talking now about, the rematch and if it should happen or not. I think if Canelo was to win this fight, you probably would have seen the fight with Triple G. I think that fight's very unlikely now. I think both fighters talking about the rematch. I think Eddie Hearn's talking about doing a rematch. And I find it a bit odd that Canelo was so eager to jump into the rematch straight away. I think as a fighter, it's a fight he wants back because obviously he doesn't want to take an L and not have a second chance of redemption. But I think, after the fight, he was talking about how he was doing so well in there, and he thought the fight was a little bit close, but he thought he won it quite convincingly. And I think if he goes back and looks at this fight again, he's going to see that that wasn't the case. But he's going to take this fight again by the looks of things. And I think a lot of things have got to change. Like I said, I think he's got to be the one who's constantly pressuring Bivol. The problem with that is Bivol's not a fighter who's gonna just sit on the ropes for Canelo to tee off on. You saw a lot of the times as soon as his back was, almost on the ropes, he would be turning out of there. And I thought he did a great job of like nullifying the pressure of Canelo at times. I think Canelo's output was poor, and I think when he looks back on it, he'll probably agree. He was so frustrated at times, and I think he wasn't the smartest fighter in there. I felt like he fought off more emotion than he did off, kind of a game plan or something like that. But for me, I do think Canelo can do well in the rematch. I really do. I don't think it's a fight which is impossible for him to win. I think, the judges in this fight have some questioning to do because, that wasn't a 115, 113. I think you're being pretty generous if you give Canelo 3 or 4 rounds. I saw 2 rounds for Canelo. I think you probably could see 3. I think 4 would probably be the maximum, but he didn't score 5 for me, no way. But yeah, in this rematch, I think people got to remember that the judges are pretty much going to be in favor of Canelo Alvarez because I think boxing's corrupt for one. Maybe it is the fact that his work is a little bit more flashier than the likes of someone like a Bivol, who is, using a lot of the fundamentals, but using them very, very well. I think if Canelo can be the more aggressive fighter in the second fight, he can have success. I think one of the problems in this fight as well was his ability to break down the guard of Dimitri Bivol. I think Bivol did a great job with his guard. He was never really hit with anything too clean. I think an uppercut maybe somewhere in the middle of the fight might have landed on him. But the thing is, Canelo would land with a good shot and you'd be like, oh wow, Canelo's done this. But Bivol would come back and he'd be throwing combinations of like 6 and 7 and kind of overwhelming Canelo. But the other thing I liked from Bivol was he was very patient in there. He took the fight to Canelo, but he wasn't, just throwing for the sake of throwing. He was picking his moments, picking his spots. And I think when you saw Canelo at the times kind of, waving him on while he's against the been watching too much MMA, against the ropes, I think, he did a great job of kind of going, nah, fuck that, you come to me. And I really enjoyed the performance from Bivol. I think this fight is a great fight for him because, he's going to have earned so many more fans. Like for me, for example, like I have watched Bivol a couple times, maybe 3 or 4 times at most. But after this fight, I'm a big fan. I think I want to watch him a lot more. You know, I've watched Canelo so many fucking times now. And I think this is probably one of Canelo's biggest tests. I think it was kind of a similar fight to, you know, the Mayweather one, in terms of like he didn't really get going at all, did he? And I'm interested to see the rematch. I know a lot of people aren't. I think a lot of people look at this fight and the first fight and how it went down, and probably are going to, you know, give Bivol he's going to be a heavy favourite going into it, and I think he deserves that after this performance. But I do think Canelo could get it done in a rematch. Something tells me that, you know, that performance from him wasn't a 10 out of 10 Canelo performance. I think you might be looking at that performance from Canelo as like a 5 out of 10. I think he's got a lot more room to grow, but I think in terms of his game, I think there's more levels to it than that, and I think he can definitely give Bivol problems in the next fight, especially if he can cut off the ring a bit better. I think you know, he did push Bivol back at times, but I think maybe the footwork of Canelo, because he's so heavy on his he's not very light on his feet. You know, it seemed pretty easy for Bivol to get out of, you know, situations where he was pressured backwards. I think Canelo will have to change his style if he's going to win this fight. I think he's got to be a lot more lighter, a lot more quicker. And for me, I think the difference between the two was, you know, Canelo was looking for these home run shots and Bivol wasn't. Bivol was just looking to land, and if it landed or not, it didn't really matter, as long as he was overwhelming Canelo with, you know, pressure and volume. And for me, I was very impressed. I cannot wait to see Bivol fight again, especially if it's against Canelo in this rematch. I think it will be a great fight, and I cannot wait to see it. Let me know how you scored it down below in the comments. Tell me how many rounds you scored for Canelo, because for me, I think it's criminal if you're giving him more than 4. I think 4 is right on the limit. But yeah, I'm interested to see how you scored it. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel. Like I said, I've got a video coming out later where I'm going to be doing a UFC fight night kind of like prediction video. Jan Blachowicz, Alexander Rakic, and there's a couple other really fun fights on the card. So please leave us, please subscribe down below, leave a like, and I'll see you next time, guys. Take care of yourselves. Peace.